thanks to the Woods Hole Group tonight. Building Shoreline Resiliency in Marshfield and Duxbury. Historically, beaches are very important to Marshfield. It's a way of life and tourism. When you look back at Wrexham Beach, people used to bring their cattle down there and walk them across the beach. People come from all over the country to visit our beaches and coastline, our natural dunes, to find solace and comfort on the beach. Tonight, we'll be hearing the findings of the Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management funded project to design and permit beach and dune nourishment projects at vulnerable locations along east-facing beaches and shorelines. We, the residents and town government, need to consider how to protect and reduce damage to the town's infrastructure and enhancement of our beaches. You might ask, I don't know if I lost people, but.
No, you're there.
Nope, you're there, Mike.
You might ask how. Tonight, you will hear many options from protection strategies that will supplement the town's existing approaches. Coastal armoring, elevate structures, regulate development in hazard areas, beach nourishment with sand plantings, reduce wave energy, dune nourishment, intertidal boulder fields, manage retreat, status quo, do nothing. And it's up to everyone to decide. Please listen to the compelling information that will be presented tonight. Ask questions and share this information with neighbors, friends, and family. Thank you for participating.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Val, do you want to say anything, or you want me just to go ahead and start the presentation?
Oh, I think you could go ahead and start. Thank you.
All right. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can everybody see this? Thumbs up, thank you. Okay. Thank you for that introduction, Michael. And just wanted to let you know that my name is Leslie Fields. I work for the Woods Hole Group, and we are the consultants that have been working with the towns of Marshfield and Duxbury on this project. The project is focused on, as Michael said, building shoreline resiliency in Marshfield and Duxbury through beach and dune nourishment. I'm going to walk you through a series of just under 40 slides that describe the need for the project. So in other words, why the towns need to build this shoreline resiliency, and then describe the work we've done to identify sites where beach and dune nourishment are feasible alternatives, and to describe what those projects look like. I'm going to ask if everyone can just mute their screens while we're going through the presentation. That would go a long way towards making it so everyone can hear. I also wanted to acknowledge the fact that this is a coastal zone management funded. It's being funded through a coastal zone management grant issued through the Coastal Resiliency Grant Program. Ordinarily, we'd be having this public meeting in person, but due to the pandemic, we're having this virtual meeting. But I want you to know that we are accepting questions and comments both at the end of this presentation and also, later on, if you think of something that you want to ask or a comment, please send those questions or comments to one of the two planners. So the planner in your town, either Greg Guimond in Marshfield or Valerie Massard in Duxbury. Their email addresses are shown on the screen. So the goal of this project is to identify sites where beach and dune nourishment can be used to augment the town's existing approaches for building shoreline resiliency, and to begin the permitting process for those selected sites. As I said, the project has been funded by a CZM Coastal Resiliency Grant. The cost of the project is shown here. It's $234,546. The town's received a grant from CZM for $175,842, and they provided a catch, a 20% cash and in-kind services match of $58,704. The grant was awarded back in September of 2019 and is due to be wrapped up at the end of September 2020. I wanted to just also say that this project really builds on other work that's been funded through the CZM Coastal Resiliency Program. So earlier, Marshfield completed an evaluation of Green Harbor and the dredging that's done there, and whether that material can be used beneficially to nourish nearby beaches. And then also Duxbury Beach Reservation to the south in Duxbury has received a number of grants from CZM to help build the resiliency of that barrier beach. So this project's really building on the work that was done before to create a regional approach for building resiliency in the shoreline, in the towns of Marshfield and Duxbury. All right, just a little bit about the towns of Marshfield and Duxbury. They're both vibrant coastal communities. They have both year-round and seasonal residents. The population of Marshfield is 25,000, and in Duxbury, there's a year-round population of 15,500. Both towns have a pretty big increase in population of about 38% during the summer months. The development in these towns is really primarily single-family homes along the coastline. There is a little bit of commercial development in the town of Marshfield. And as you can see in these two photographs here, this left one of Duxbury Beach, the northern part of Duxbury along Garnet Road, and then the Marshfield shoreline in this upper photograph, you can see that the towns are composed, or shorelines are composed of a series of barrier beaches. So those are these narrow sections of beach where the ocean's on one side and there's an estuary or bay on the back side. Those are the barrier beaches. And then up in Marshfield, there are a few headlands where the mainland comes out right to meet the shoreline. And so those barrier beaches are interspersed with a couple of headlands in Marshfield. One thing I also wanted to point out is that in Duxbury, the project area includes all of the Marshfield shoreline and the northern part of the Duxbury shoreline. The southern part of the shoreline in Duxbury that's owned and managed by the Duxbury Beach Reservation is outside the scope of this project area or this project, but is, as I said before, being addressed under other additional CZM resiliency grants. The shorelines in both towns have extensive coastal armoring. You can see in this left diagram, the red lines indicate areas where there is existing coastal armoring. 83% of the shoreline in Marshfield is armored with shore protection structures, so that's seawalls or revetments. And 91% of the shoreline in Duxbury, in that northern part of Duxbury where it's developed, 91% of that shoreline is armored. And these photos just show examples of some of the armoring up and down the coastline. I think the first two are in Marshfield and this bottom one is in Duxbury. So this slide illustrates some of the impacts of this coastal armoring that I was just talking about. There's obviously some clear benefits of shoreline armoring, and that the walls act as the last line of defense for erosion. So once the beach erodes back to the seawall, you can't go any further, and the properties behind the seawall are protected from erosion. But there are also disadvantages of coastal armoring. And mainly it's the seawall adversely impacts the beach in front of the seawall. So this graphic shows some of those adverse impacts and the differences between how a natural beach responds to coastal processes and how an armored beach responds. So you can see on the left-hand side, this is a natural beach, and you can see this beach width here. And if you have a storm comes, it will erode part of this dune, and then you end up with the same beach width, just translated further inland. So that beach can migrate inland as it needs to respond to coastal processes. But on the right-hand side with the seawalls, you can see that you start out with a pretty wide beach, but over time, that beach width decreases and the elevation of the beach also drops. And that's because it can't migrate landward because of the seawalls. So just sort of continuing with the impacts of coastal armoring, with that lower beach elevation, we end up getting deeper water during storms. With that deeper water, we get larger waves that impact the seawalls. And with those larger waves, we get more wave overtopping. With more wave overtopping, increased damage to the homes and public utilities and whatever's behind the walls. So in the photographs here, we've got a picture of Brant Rock during the March 2018 storm, and you can see significant overtopping in this area. And then these are pictures of post-storm damage to some of the walls in both Marshfield and Duxbury. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the town's current management approaches for shoreline management. So both towns have active programs for managing the shoreline. They've got staff that's dedicated to maintaining the structures there in the towns, to ensuring public safety during storms, and to help with cleanup after the storms, and plan for future planning studies to help combat climate change. So the current management approaches include things like maintaining, repairing shore protection structures. There has been a history of elevating and or buying out structures in a few locations. They also regulate development in these high hazard areas. And they perform planning studies through the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program that's run by the state, and also through these Coastal Zone Management Resiliency grants. So this current management approach is really aimed at minimizing flooding during storms and reducing damages to buildings and public infrastructure, roads and utilities. This slide here shows some of the costs associated with the current management approach. It's broken down by town, so Marshfield and Duxbury, and it includes things like costs associated with FEMA repetitive loss claims. So over the last, I think, 39 years, there's been 15 million paid out in Marshfield for repetitive loss claims and 5 million in Duxbury. We also looked at costs moving forward over the next 30 years for seawall repairs, 49.5 million and 15.9 million in both towns, as well as costs associated with providing those public services during the storm and afterwards. So over the next 30 years, Marshfield's looking at paying 71.9 million and Duxbury at 26.4 million. So in addition to these large outlays of capital, the towns are still going to have continued overtopping and damage to properties. They're going to have continued risk to public safety. There's going to be more damage to the seawalls with increased costs for repair and maintenance. There's a potential loss of tax revenue. There's definitely a loss of beach for storm damage protection and for recreation and for wildlife habitat. And there's also the potential for a decline in tourism. There's some very real costs associated with continuing along the same path that's been used in the past. So that sort of brings us to the need for this project. So knowing the costs associated with the status quo and knowing that we need to adjust to the impacts of climate change, there's a real need to increase the resiliency of the shoreline. So it brings us back to the goal of the project, which is to identify and permit resilient strategies, primarily beach and dune nourishment, that will improve storm damage protection, reduce damages caused by coastal flooding, reduce wave-induced damages, create resiliency to climate change, and really augment the current management approach. All right, so that sort of lays the background for why the towns need this project, why they need to increase shoreline resiliency. Now I'm going to move into talking about what we've done during this project. So one of the first things we did in identifying feasible strategies was to evaluate the characteristics of the shoreline, and we tried to group the shoreline into beach segments with similar characteristics. So we ended up dividing the Marshfield and Duxbury shoreline into 14 different areas, and those are shown here in this figure, 14 different beaches. And we did that based on existing conditions. So we looked at things like whether or not the beach is natural or armored. Is it armored? What kind of shoreline armoring is it? Is it a revetment or a seawall? We looked at the condition in front of the seawalls and the sediment types. So we looked at all those things, and we ended up finding out that there's only 3 sections of natural beach and dune in Marshfield and Duxbury. That's Wrexham Public Beach up here, Winslow Ave Beach, and then also Green Harbor Beach down here right south of the harbor. There are a number of beaches with seawalls, so Fieldston and Sunrise, Hewitt's Point, Brant Rock, Bay Ave, and Garnet Road. And there are a few areas where there are revetments. So that's Ocean Bluff, Hewitt's Point, and South Brant Rock. There are a couple of areas where there's a combination of seawall and revetment. So it's not just exclusively seawall or revetment. There's a couple of areas where there's both. So next we identified a range of resiliency alternatives that would be considered at each one of those 14 beaches. So this slide shows some of the more traditional nature-based or soft engineering alternatives. So they include beach nourishment, implementation of a cobble berm or dune, and then just dune nourishment with sand. And these alternatives, nature-based alternatives, are intended to buffer the homes and public infrastructure from storm waves and to restore sediment to the system. They can be used in combination with existing coastal armoring, so you can have a seawall or a revetment, and you can put these soft nature-based alternatives in front of it. You should also know that any one of these alternatives requires maintenance and renourishment. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. But the pictures here, this is a picture of a beach and dune nourishment project that was constructed at Cow Bay Beach on the Vineyard. This is a picture of a cobble berm in Scituate that has been augmented and enhanced several times to improve storm damage protection for areas landward of it. And then this picture up here on the right is Duxbury Beach Reservation, where they, in 2019, implemented a dune nourishment project funded by a CZM grant, where they brought in 76,000 cubic yards of sand to build the dune up for increased resiliency. So we also considered a range of hybrid alternatives for enhancing shoreline resiliency, primarily for areas where beach and dune nourishment was found to be infeasible, or it wasn't a viable alternative. And that was found to be either infeasible or not a viable alternative, either because of potential impacts to sensitive marine resources or because the costs associated with maintaining a soft solution in these locations was cost prohibitive. In other words, the sand would wash away quickly, and we would have to renourish on a very frequent intervals. So the hybrid alternatives include things like constructed reefs, intertidal boulder field, and we also looked at offshore breakwaters. They're not really hybrid alternatives, but I've included them here on this slide just so I can talk about them. They are intended primarily to reduce wave energy reaching the shoreline. They can be constructed individually or layered with other alternatives. And things like the reefs and the intertidal boulder field are intended to be flexible and adapted over time. So right now, these alternatives are considered potential alternatives for the Marshfield and Duxbury shoreline, and that they still need further evaluation and design. And again, these are alternatives that were considered in areas where the soft beach and dune nourishment alternatives were not feasible. I don't have it shown on this slide, but I wanted to mention that we also looked at other alternatives, including enhancing, like raising the elevation of the existing structures or building something in front of them like an extended revetment in front of the seawalls. So we looked at the feasibility of that at each of the beaches. We also looked at elevating homes and the costs associated with that. And we also looked at managed retreat, so moving away from the shoreline in areas that are going to be inundated in the future. And then we also looked at the status quo alternative, which is just continuing to maintain what you're doing now. So after selecting the range of resiliency alternatives, whether it's soft, hybrid, or some of the more traditional or long-term alternatives, we used engineering judgment to assess the applicability of the different alternatives at each of the sites, taking into account economic feasibility, performance and long-term viability, potential environmental impacts, as well as costs. So this slide on the left shows the 14 beaches that we evaluated and some of the criteria we used as a part of this engineering judgment. So we looked at coastal armoring. Was it present? Was it absent? If it was present, what kind of coastal armoring is it, and what's the condition of the armoring? We looked at whether or not there are any sensitive resources nearby, and those are shown by some of the rocky intertidal resources are shown by these blue polygons in this figure here. We also looked at beach width, slope, elevation, and sediment characteristics on the beaches. We also look at the capacity of the various alternatives to reduce storm damage and improve resiliency. Over on the right-hand side shows a couple more characteristics we looked at. We looked at directions of sediment transport, and that's what this figure on the right shows. So we conducted some numerical modeling to evaluate directions of sediment transport within the project area. These arrows show the net directions of sediment transport in the study area. And you can see, interestingly enough, areas of sediment divergence where the net sediment transport, for example, in the Ocean Bluff and Hewitt's Point and Brant Rock area, is really away from those beaches to the north and to the south, which means you would expect to see erosion there, which we do. And it's also an indication of the fact, it's also an indication that those are areas where it would be really hard to maintain a beach nourishment project because the sediment moves away from those areas so rapidly. We also looked at the economic feasibility of the alternatives too. So these are just some of the factors that we use in deciding which alternative was applicable to which site. Next, I'm going to take you through that evaluation process for 3 sites, so 3 of the 14 beaches, and those are shown here. So the first one is Wrexham Beach. That's the developed portion of Wrexham Beach, and extends from Parker Street down to Porter Street. Wrexham Public Beach was as undeveloped as to the north of this. I'm also going to show you our evaluation process for Ocean Bluff Beach that extends from the south end of Foster Ave to Samoset Ave. And then also I'll show you what we did for Garnet Road Beach in Duxbury. Okay, so here's a table that shows for Wrexham Beach, again, the developed portion of Wrexham Beach, shows all the alternatives we evaluated on the left here, all the way from status quo down to managed retreat. The middle column shows the action associated with each one of those alternatives, like what we considered would be done, as well as the estimated cost. And the last column shows the recommendation, whether or not we recommended the towns pursue that alternative or not. Okay, so this is the one again for Wrexham Beach. So I'm going to take you through this. For the status quo alternative, this assumes there's continued maintenance of the existing structures, but nothing additional to rebuild those structures or anything additional. It's just maintaining the existing structures. So it's more, you can think of it more as a reactionary approach. The costs that we looked at for this include those FEMA repetitive loss claims, as well as costs to the municipalities associated with providing services during storms and post-storm cleanup. So in the Wrexham Beach area over the next 30 years, we estimated about a little bit more than $2 million in this area to maintain the status quo. And so while this alternative does not help improve storm damage protection, there's going to be continued damages. This was not an option that we recommended pursuing. We also looked at enhancing or enlarging the existing structures. And so by this, I mean increasing the height of the seawalls or revetments, or maybe increasing the tow protection by adding a bigger structure in front of the existing walls. And the purpose would be to reduce overtopping below levels that cause damage to the houses behind. And so in the Wrexham area, we found that we'd have to increase the walls by anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 feet in order to reduce that overtopping to an acceptable level. Costs associated with that would be $21.1 million. So this approach was considered to be costly with no real benefits to the beach, and for that reason, it wasn't recommended. Beach and dune nourishment, we did not consider those two alternatives for this section of beach because of the presence of sensitive rocky intertidal resources just offshore of the beach. These rocky intertidal resources are areas where there's valuable macrofauna that grows on the rocks. It's a food source and a sheltering source for many marine organisms. It's also essential fish habitat for juvenile cod, which is protected by NOAA National Marine Fisheries. And any sort of beach or dune nourishment would result in adverse impacts to those rocky intertidal resources. It's not permittable in areas where there's rocky intertidal, and for that reason, those two alternatives were not considered for this beach. We did look at the idea of an intertidal boulder field, which would mean installing boulders, sort of a field of boulders in the intertidal area in order to reduce wave overtopping. Estimated costs for that are about $8.1 million for this area. And because of the benefits that this could provide to the homes, we decided that this alternative warranted further evaluation and potential design, and the towns could decide if they wanted to pursue that and permit it at a later stage. We also looked at elevating the structures as well as managed retreat. So as a first cut, we really just looked at elevating structures or managed retreat for the first row of homes, because these are the homes that are at most risk from wave overtopping damages. So in this area of Wrexham Beach, we decided or estimated that it would cost about $5.1 million to elevate those 41 homes and about $26.5 million to retreat or to buy out those 41 homes. I will say that, so the town is evaluating, how they might phase these sort of alternatives, elevating structures and managed retreat in over the next 30 years as sea levels rise and these two alternatives become more and more important. So the towns are evaluating that. I will say that as they go through that process, it's likely they're going to need to look at both of these alternatives for more than just the first row of homes, because more than the first row, the impacts of wave overtopping and flooding are going to affect more than that first row of homes. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. But as a first cut, we just looked at the first row. Okay, moving to Ocean Bluff, our evaluation for Ocean Bluff. Here again, these are the alternatives we considered, the actions and costs and the recommendations. So for the status quo, this includes maintaining those existing structures, maintaining that revetment, not rebuilding it, just maintaining it. It also includes costs associated with those FEMA repetitive loss claims and providing those public services during and after storms. Those costs for this section are estimated to be $93 million over the next 30 years. So because this alternative doesn't protect against continued storm damages, it wasn't recommended. We also looked at enhancing or enlarging that existing revetment, so increasing the height of the existing revetment to reduce overtopping below levels that damage the homes. And here we determined we would have to increase the height of the wall almost 8 feet in order to provide protection during even a 10-year storm. Costs associated with that are over $17 million. So because this solution is most costly and there aren't really any benefits that were provided to the beach, it wasn't recommended. I should mention that cost also includes the option of building a bigger revetment so that you would that extends further seaward, so you would get more benefits for reduced overtopping. So it's either raising it or making it wider. Both costs are around $17 million. We did not consider beach and dune nourishment for this area for the same reasons that we didn't consider it from Wrexham Beach. So there are rocky intertidal resources offshore. But in addition to that, this area would require frequent renourishment because of that sediment transport pattern that I spoke of earlier, where there's a divergence zone in this area. So sediment transport is moving both to the north and to the south. That would require almost annual renourishment. So we did some calculations on what that would be. So assuming renourishment every year over a 10-year period would be about 51 million in order to keep beach nourishment in place in the Ocean Bluff area. So for these reasons, we didn't consider beach or dune nourishment at Ocean Bluff. Here again, we did look at the intertidal boulder field idea, so installing an intertidal boulder field to reduce overtopping. Estimated costs for that in this area are about 5 million. And again, we thought that it warranted further evaluation and potentially design, and the town could move forward with that if they decided that was something that they felt was warranted. We also looked at managed retreat for this area. So we have some numerical models that evaluate the probability of flooding now and in the future. So with sea level rise and storms, so now in 2030, 2050, and 2070. Based on those model results, we identified about 12 to 15 homes that are going to become vulnerable to flooding almost on an annual basis in the Ocean Bluff area. So we made an estimate that it would cost about 7.1 million for managed retreat of those homes in the Ocean Bluff area. And again, this is something that the town can consider phasing in for implementation over the next 30 years. Okay, finally, this last one is for the Garnet Road beach area in Duxbury. Status quo is the same, so it's maintaining those existing structures, it's paying the FEMA claims, and providing the public services during and after storms. Cost for that in the Garnet Road area only, not up in Bay Ave, but Garnet Road in Duxbury, are about 27 million over the next 30 years. So here again, because there's no benefits for reducing storm damage, this alternative wasn't recommended. We looked again at enhancing or enlarging the seawalls. It was determined that we would need to increase the height of the seawalls anywhere from 3.5 to 8 feet in order to protect against overtopping that would damage the homes during a 50-year storm. Costs associated with this were estimated to be about 28.4 million. Here again, it's a costly solution with no real benefits to the beach, so it wasn't recommended. We did look at beach and dune nourishment and found that those were viable alternatives for this section of beach. So we looked at a large-scale beach nourishment that would require renourishment every 3 to 5 years. Costs estimated for that just for Duxbury are about 5 million for that initial implementation. It would provide improved storm damage protection, enhanced recreational value, as well as enhanced wildlife habitat, and the recommendation was to proceed with permitting. We also looked at dune nourishment, but that was in combination with the beach nourishment. We didn't look at a dune nourishment by itself for the Garnet Road area. The combination of the recommendation there was to proceed with permitting for the combined dune and beach nourishment project. We did not consider an intertidal boulder field in this area, basically because the softer beach and dune nourishment alternatives were viable, and that was the main focus of the project. We didn't look at the intertidal boulder field here. But in addition to that, if we did look at it, it would result in a conversion of resource area from intertidal beach to this intertidal sort of boulder field area, and that's generally not something that's permittable. And so for those two reasons, we didn't consider the intertidal boulder field. We did look at costs associated with elevating the homes and managed retreat. Again, just for that first row of homes as a first cut, the costs estimated for elevating all 57 homes along that first row in Duxbury about 7.1 million and 47.3 million to retreat from that first row of homes. Here again, this is something that the towns are looking at and trying to decide ways to phase implementation of these alternatives in over the next 30 years when it's really going to be needed. Here again, just keep in mind that our look at just that first row of homes was the first cut. And when the towns really get into this, it's likely they're going to have to look at these two alternatives for more than just the first row. Okay, so that was an example of how we went through our evaluation of alternatives for each of the 14 sites. I just showed you 3 as an example. This slide here shows the locations where we were able to identify sites that were viable or feasible for these soft solutions. So we identified Wrexham Public Beach and Winslow Ave Beach as areas where dune nourishment was a viable alternative. And we identified Fieldston and Sunrise and Bay Ave and Garnet Road as areas where beach and dune nourishment were viable alternatives for enhancing resiliency. This slide shows the other beaches where beach and or dune nourishment were found not to be viable alternatives. And for these areas, we are recommending that the towns give further consideration to these hybrid alternatives that have co-benefits for increasing habitat, and also evaluate alternatives for elevating the homes and our managed retreat. So these areas include Wrexham Beach, so the developed portion of Wrexham Beach in the northern part of Marshfield, Ocean Bluff, Hewitt's Point, Brant Rock, and South Brant Rock, as well as Bluefish Cove. 2 areas, Blakeman's Point and Green Harbor, areas where we recommend continuing with the status quo. Okay, so the next set of slides, now I'm going to move into our evaluation of the dune and beach nourishment projects at these 4 locations. So we're going to talk about sort of what we considered for alternatives at each site. We're going to talk about the levels of storm damage protection provided by these projects, expected renourishment intervals, and associated costs. And one thing I want to point out at this point right here is these projects that we looked at, they're engineered beach nourishment designs. So they have specific design elements for height, for width, and for length. And they're designed to provide protection during specific storm events. So like a 10-year storm or a 50-year storm. So it's important to draw a distinction between an engineered beach and one that's a nourishment project that's constructed as a result of something we call beneficial reuse. And what I mean by that is if there's a dredging project that's creating sediment and they need a place to put that material, it's frequently placed on the beach to help add resiliency, and that's called a beneficial reuse project. So we need to draw a distinction between an engineered beach and a beneficial reuse project. So the engineered projects are generally large-scale projects, as I said, that are designed to protect against storm damages from specific storms, whereas the nourishment that's part of a beneficial reuse project typically involves smaller volumes of material over shorter lengths of beach, and because they're smaller, they don't last as long as the engineered beach projects. Doesn't mean that they're not beneficial for the beaches, though, especially in beaches that are sediment starved, like Marshfield and Duxbury. These beaches are sediment starved. They don't have the sediment that they need in order to combat the effects of sea level rise or storm effects because of the armoring. So it's just important to understand that even though those beneficial reuse projects may disappear more quickly, they're still beneficial to the beaches because that material spreads to other beaches that need sediment as well. So I just wanted to set the expectations for the 2 different types of projects. One of the goals of this project is to permit these larger engineered beach nourishment designs. So then the towns can decide how to fund and when to move forward with the larger projects, but they're also in a position to accept material from nearby dredging projects for beneficial reuse. So that gives the towns a lot of flexibility. Right now, if there's a nearby dredging project and they want to have a place to put the material, because the towns don't have permits, they can't accept the material. So this project, when we get the permits, will add flexibility for the towns to consider how to fund and when to fund the larger projects, but also to accept smaller volumes as beneficial reuse. All right, so this slide here shows the three alternatives we evaluated for Wrexham Public Beach. Alternative 1 is a dune nourishment project, and alternatives 2 and 3 were dune plus beach nourishment. And the footprints are shown here. If you follow the key, you can see which is which. This particular project was evaluated for the parcel that is owned by the town that is the public beach, as well as a parcel that's owned by the Sea Rivers Trust to the north, which is also undeveloped. So the town of Marshfield will be reaching out to the Sea Rivers Trust the next month to see about extending the project across their property and securing the proper easements for that work. This slide here shows just a cross section of that design at Wrexham Beach. So if you look at the graph at the bottom, this is distance sort of across the beach. On this side, you've got the parking lot at the public beach, and on this side, you've got the ocean. So it's sort of a slice through the beach and dune. This black line is the existing dune. You see how it slopes down to the beach and then eventually down to the nearshore area. And so the three alternatives that we considered are shown here. You can see that alternatives 1 and 2, which is this line here, are an enhanced dune. Alternative 2 continues down here with this blue dashed line for beach nourishment. Then alternative 3 is the green line, which is just the beach nourishment. This slide summarizes the size and volume of the three alternatives, as well as the level of storm damage protection provided, the service life or renourishment requirement, and then the expected costs. So for Wrexham Public Beach, we've got these three alternatives. You can see the dune-only alternative for alternative 1 is the one that requires the smallest volume of material at 47,240 cubic yards, covers 5.3 acres, whereas the alternative 3 for the beach nourishment only requires the most amount of sand at 129,000 cubic yards, covering 14.1 acres. All three alternatives provide protection for the existing dune and parking lot and South River area on the backside of the barrier beach for storms up to the 50-year storm. We also looked at service life. So that means how often you have to come back in and re-nourish that beach or dune in order to provide that level of storm damage protection. At this beach, we calculated service life based on how long it takes for all of that material that's placed to move outside the nourishment footprint. So alternative 1, which is the dune-only alternative, has the longest service life at 10 years. Alternative 2 is the shortest at 6 years. You can see the cost for the projects range anywhere from 1.6 million up to 3.9 million. So we ended up recommending as a preferred alternative, alternative 1, which is the dune-only alternative that would be built with fine to medium grain sand to match the existing sand that's in the dune right now. We recommended that because of its longer service life and its lower cost and its impact to to a smaller area, just a smaller area of impact. Benefits from this project are improved storm damage protection, again, for the existing dune, the parking lot, and the South River on the backside of the barrier beach. It also provide improved wildlife habitat and increased recreation. Okay, moving on to Winslow Ave Beach. We looked at only 2 alternatives for Winslow Ave Beach. We looked at both of them are dune nourishment alternatives. We did not look at a beach nourishment alternative for Winslow Ave Beach for a number of reasons, namely that this area is, I guess, at less vulnerable than the other areas. There's really no record of any repetitive loss damage in this area. And the elevation of the landform sort of slopes up as you move away from the beach. And so these homes back here are really less vulnerable to storm damage. So that's why we didn't look at any sort of beach nourishment alternatives here. I guess also that the development is set further back from the shoreline, so that's another reason why it's less vulnerable. Here again is the cross section going right through the beach. The black is the existing beach and dune. You can see alternative 1 is just a smaller dune. It slopes down to the sort of near the toe of the existing dune. Then alternative 2 is a slightly higher and wider dune. Here's the table that summarizes the area of impact, level of storm damage protection, and costs. So alternative 1 would require 11,200 cubic yards of material over 3.7 acres. Alternative 2 would require 17,850 cubic yards over 4.5 acres. Alternative 1 would provide protection for storms up to the 10-year storm event, whereas alternative 2, because it's bigger, provides protection for storms above the 10-year recurrence interval, but less than the 50-year storm. So somewhere in between those two storms. Costs are anywhere from $336,000 to $535,000. We did recommend alternative 2, so the bigger dune for Winslow Ave. It would be constructed with cobble-sized material to match what's in that existing dune now, because it's really a cobble dune. And benefits of this project would include storm damage protection for those properties behind the dune. Okay, moving on to Fieldston and Sunrise beaches. So this slide shows the 3 alternatives we considered for Fieldston and Sunrise. The first 2 are dune and beach nourishment alternatives, and the third is just a beach nourishment alternative. All of these projects occur on private properties that extend seaward of the seawall. The towns are going to be reaching out to the homeowners in the next month to secure the necessary easements for construction on private properties, as well as to allow public passage on these beaches. Those easements are a requirement of the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection Waterways Program that requires these easements be granted in any case where public funds are used to nourish private properties. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that towards the end of this presentation, but I just wanted to bring it up now. The towns are going to be reaching out to these property owners in the very near future to get those easements. Here again is the cross section for Fieldston and Sunrise with the 3 alternatives. Here's the seawall and this black line and the beach extending out here. You can see alternatives 1 and 2 have this dune with a wider beach that slopes down to the low tide area, existing low tide area. And alternative 3 is just the beach nourishment. One thing I think is sort of helpful so you can get an idea of what this looks like. This gray dashed line right here is high tide right now. So if you extend that over here, you're almost near the base of the seawall. So at high tide, as many of you know, there's not really a beach there. But with these projects, any one of these nourishment projects, high tide would be pushed seaward anywhere from 140 to 165 feet. So at high tide, you're going to have 140 feet of beach or 165 feet of beach in front of these seawalls. And it's going to be anywhere from 4 to 7 feet higher than it is now. So that's right, right after construction, that's what we could expect to see. This table shows performance of those 3 alternatives. The size of impact ranges anywhere from 30.5 acres to 37 acres. The volumes range anywhere from 339,000 to 409,000 cubic yards. All 3 alternatives provide protection against damaging wave overtopping during storms up to the 10-year storm. Right now, these properties are susceptible to overtopping damages during a 2-year storm. So these beaches will provide protection during storms up to the 10-year storm from that damaging wave overtopping. Our modeling on service life or renourishment interval shows that we'd have to come back anywhere from 3 to 4 years in order to renourish these beaches so that they continue to provide protection. The service life at these beaches, this one and the next beach, are based on renourishment when 80% of the material has moved out of the nourishment footprint. We don't want to wait until 100% has moved out of the footprint, because we want that sand there to help continue providing protection against overtopping. So we don't want to wait until all of it's gone. So we've made these service life estimates based on when 80% has moved out of the footprint. And again, in these sediment-starved beaches, even though it's moved out of the footprint at Fieldston and Sunrise, it's still benefiting adjacent beaches that are also sediment-starved. So it's still a benefit to the region. Costs associated with these three alternatives at Fieldston and Sunrise range from $10.1 million to $12.2 million. We ended up recommending alternative 2 as the preferred alternative for Fieldston and Sunrise. That includes nourishment with medium grain sand that's mixed with both gravel and cobble. So that's to match the existing sediment characteristics on the beach, because there are areas that have coarse grain material. There's areas that have gravel. And the regulatory officials are going to require that we replicate the beach with material similar to what's on the beach right now. So that needs to be a clear expectation of the public. Benefits of this particular alternative are reduced overtopping, improved wildlife habitat, and improved recreation. It's also important to note that this particular beach nourishment project, so alternative 2, is going to provide protection for more than just that first row of homes. So there's a lot of homes in this area that are impacted by wave overtopping and storm damages, and this will provide protection for all of those homes, not just that first row. Okay, moving on to the Bay Ave and Garnet Road beaches. The three alternatives we looked at for Bay Ave and Garnet Road that spans both Marshfield in the north and Duxbury in the south. Alternatives 1 and 2 are dune and beach nourishment, and alternative 3 was beach nourishment only. All three alternatives include nourishment on private properties. So here again, the towns are going to be reaching out to those private homeowners to secure those easements for construction access and easements for the public to use these beaches, because public funds are going to be used to nourish private properties. Here's the cross section for the Bay Ave Garnet Road beaches. Here's the black line is the existing beach. Here's the seawalls. Then beach drops very low right in front of the seawalls. You can see alternatives 1 and 2 up here have a dune, and then come seaward with the beach down to the mean low water line. Alternative 3 is the nourishment only alternative. You can see it has a fairly wide beach that slopes down to the low tide line. In these locations, again, if you consider this high tide line, right now it's almost at the base of the seawalls. With any one of these alternatives, we're going to move high water seaward by 190 feet. And we're going to raise the elevation of the beach anywhere from 4 to 7 feet above current elevations. Here's the summary table for the Bay Ave and Garnet Road beaches. So the area of impact ranges anywhere from 36.4 acres for alternative 2 to 50.3 acres for alternative 1. And it requires anywhere from 313,000 cubic yards to 527,000 cubic yards of material. Here again, all three alternatives provide protection against damaging overtopping during storms up to the 10-year storm. These areas right now are susceptible to damage because of overtopping during 1 and 2 year storm events. So this is a measurable increase in storm damage protection with these projects. The service life of the projects ranges anywhere from 4.5 to 5.5 years. Again, that's when calculated based on when 80% of the material is lost from the initial nourishment footprint. The costs for these alternatives, I've divided up. The first number is for Marshfield. The second number is for Duxbury. And that's just based on linear footage. So for Marshfield, the costs range anywhere from 4.4 million to 7.4 million. And for Duxbury, anywhere from 5 million to 8.4 million. So we ended up recommending as a preferred alternative for the Bay Ave and Garnet Road area, alternative 1, It would be constructed with medium grain sand, again, mixed with gravel and cobble to mimic what's there on the beach right now. And it would provide benefits by reducing overtopping, improving wildlife habitat, and improving recreational areas. One of the reasons why we selected alternative one, even though it has the lowest service life, was because with that alternative, we saw less scarping or erosion along the seaward face of the beach, so that more of the material remained up along the base of the seawall. So we felt like that was a benefit, even though the service life was shorter. And I want to describe this graph to you. So this is one of the service life graphs. I didn't show this to you for the other beaches, but I wanted to show it to you for this one because it illustrates really that we can get additional service life for a large-scale beach nourishment project at Bay Ave Garnet Road by re-nourishment with smaller amounts of sediment from beneficial reuse projects. So I'm going to talk you through this graph here. So this x-axis is time in years after initial nourishment. So this is initial nourishment, day one, and this is 10 years after nourishment on the right. The y-axis is the volume of material remaining in the footprint. So zero's at the bottom, and then up here, where the blue line starts, is the initial volume of material for alternative one that's proposed for the Bay Ave Garnet Road project. So it's around 313,000 cubic yards. And you can see that the volume drops pretty significantly during the first 2 years. That's pretty normal for these beach nourishment projects as they sort of equilibrate to the natural coastal processes. But after 2 years, that line really flattens out. Okay, so that's why we said we could get 4.5 years before renourishment was needed. This dashed line represents an influx of 30,000 cubic yards of material annually that's dredged from the Green Harbor Channel. So you can see how the service life sort of increases. Every time you put that 30,000 on it, it increases, and then it drops a little bit, and then increases. And so I just wanted to illustrate this, that you can really extend that service life from 4.5 years to almost 9 or 10 years by these frequent renourishments or annual renourishments from nearby dredging projects. So one of the benefits of the towns getting these permits for nourishment is so that they'll have the flexibility and be in a position to accept sediment from nearby dredging projects. Right now, they can't accept it because they don't have the permits. I guess one other thing I didn't mention that is maybe pertinent is that right now, the Army Corps of Engineers, when they do that dredging from Green Harbor, they take that 30,000 yards of material and they dump it offshore. So it's lost from the longshore transport system, and it doesn't provide any sort of resiliency benefits to the shoreline or to the properties or to the public utilities behind. So we want to try to put the towns in a position where they can accept that material readily to improve resiliency of the shoreline. Okay, this slide talks about the property ownership issues. I've talked about it before, but I just want to go over it again. We are proposing nourishment on private properties at the north end of Wrexham Beach, the Sea Rivers Trust property, in the Fieldston and Sunrise area, and in the Bay Ave and Garnet Road Beach area. In order to do these projects, the towns are going to have to get easements from these property owners. And those easements will be to allow construction access for the work and to allow the public's use of the beaches because they're nourished using public monies. So again, the letters to the property owners are going out in September. In order to do these projects, it requires that all of the property owners sign the easements. The towns have decided to pursue getting the easements first. If they're not successful in all cases, there are some other tracks that the towns are discussing, so they have some other alternatives to proceed with if they don't get the easements signed. Another thing I wanted to talk about is sources of nourishment material. So what the towns are moving forward with is to permit nourishment in these 4 areas without really specifically identifying a source of material at this point. So we're just permitting nourishment footprints. But generally speaking, there's three options or three alternatives for sediment sources for beach nourishment. Option one is to use an upland sediment source that's trucked to the beach and spread on the beach. Option two is one I've talked about a number of times. It's beneficial reuse from nearby dredging projects. So we've talked about the Green Harbor dredging project producing anywhere from 25 to 30,000 cubic yards of material every year. This is a picture of the Currituck that does that work in the harbor. There's also been dredging projects in the South River in Marshfield that have produced material that could have been put on the beaches if only the towns had the permits. And there's also projects we've worked on that have made use of sediment dredged from larger federal dredging projects that were brought to the sites and spread on the beaches. So that's another alternative for beneficial reuse. If the towns have the permits, they can accept that material. For option two, the proponents of the dredging projects would get their permits for dredging, and they would identify the Marshfield and Duxbury beaches as the nourishment or disposal locations. So the towns wouldn't be responsible for permitting the dredging, just the beach nourishment sites. Option three is looking at an offshore borrow site or sites. That's potentially a cheaper option for getting material onto the beach, but the permitting is lengthy and rather difficult. So it would require additional studies for the towns to identify an offshore borrow site and additional permitting. But it is an option in the future if the towns want to pursue that. Okay, in terms of permitting, right now, the grant that the towns have requires that we file a permit with the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act unit by the middle of September. The permit we're filing is called an expanded notification form, and it starts the permitting process for nourishment, either beach nourishment or dune nourishment at the 4 locations I've talked about. The towns have also submitted grant applications to CZM to fund future or ongoing permitting after that. So if those grants are awarded, the towns will have the money to prepare an environmental impact report if required by MEPA. So that's expected that we could get that done in the 4th quarter of 2020. Those grants could also fund the remaining permitting with the local, state, and federal agencies. So assuming we could get started, in early 2021, that work would take about a year through February 2022. At that point, once all the permits are secured, the towns would need to then move into identifying and securing sources of funding for the construction. And there are a number of grants available for the towns to pursue construction monies. And there's other, bonds or borrowing sources that they could also use. So once they identify that source of funding and they secure it, assuming they move rapidly with that, I'd say the earliest possible construction for these projects, any one of them, they don't all have to be built at the same time, would be in the winter of 2023. The only exception to that would be for a beneficial reuse project. Once we get our permits after February 2022, the towns could accept any sort of beneficial reuse material provided it's compatible. One of the other things I didn't mention about those beneficial reuse projects and the permitting that the towns are doing is that by permitting all of these sites, it gives the town the flexibility to accept a range of sediment sources. So for example, if there's a dredging project that creates really fine grained material, then that would be directed towards Wrexham Beach and the dunes. If there's a project that creates coarser material, maybe that would go to Winslow Ave Beach or the other beaches where we need sort of a mixture of sand and gravel and cobble. So it really gives the towns the flexibility to direct the sediment based on its characteristics and where it's needed the most. So it gives them the maximum flexibility. All right, so that's it for my presentation. We are going to open it up to questions from the public.
Leslie, I sent you a text which summarized the first 5 or 6 questions from various people, so it would be easier and you didn't have to scroll through all the comments.
A text or
It's a chat in the chat.
chat? Okay. Okay, so I
I
will,
took some questions from Ms. Murphy, Ms. Martin, and maybe one other person. I just summarized them, so there was 5 or 6 of them there to get you started.
okay, perfect. So I'm gonna start answer. I'll look at that in just a second. I was gonna say that if you want to ask a question, after I look at those questions, if you want to ask a question in person, I think the best thing to do is to raise your hand, and I can sort of walk you through doing that. And then I'll call on you one at a time, and we can ask the questions. You can ask the questions, and I will attempt to answer them. I'm also going to say that, feel free to submit additional questions or comments to the 2 town planners, to the emails shown here. We will be posting answers to those questions on the 2 town websites. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing so that I can get to the chat. Okay. Ooh, lots of questions. These all questions?
Leslie, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see a private text to you from me. It's Bob Galvin. And
Yeah.
I took some of the questions and put them all together so you could keep them a little bit more orderly.
I see a lot of questions here. Okay, question summary. Okay, got it. Brant Rock. What, if anything, recommended for Brant Rock? So am I in the right spot, Bob?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
So for Brant Rock, what we recommended was the further consideration of the intertidal boulder field, and over the long term, elevating and managed retreat.
So exactly what would that mean in layman's terms?
What would elevating and managed retreat mean?
All of it, actually. So just starting from the beginning, what would be the recommendation? Like, do you have a study or anything that you just showed? Like, so you just outlined Wrexham, you outlined Duxbury. Just curious, do you have something very similar to Brant Rock that you could share, maybe?
We do. For all 14 beaches, we have an evaluation of all the alternatives.
Okay.
So that is in the permit application, and the towns will be posting those on their website shortly.
Okay. And Leslie, I want to tell you that this has been a fantastic presentation. Thank you very much for
You're welcome.
bringing this out. I know nothing about any of this, so it's all news to me, like how you can plant or bring in sand and stuff, and then you get another 180 feet of beach.
Yeah.
Phenomenal, because I walk these beaches. I walk Sunrise, I walk Wrexham pretty much every morning.
Okay.
From Brant Rock. So when you say nourish Brant Rock, we've had folks that have come to me. I'm a part of the Brant Rock Village Association. And we've had people come to me that said that they've seen contractors actually dumping rocks in Brant Rock, and that's the reason why we see so many of these small stones. And that at some point in time there were much more beach. So are you thinking that Brant Rock would become more of like an Egypt beach in Scituate? Because I'm also from Scituate, and I know that there's that project that's underway right now, and there's some happenings within town, and what is being recommended to be brought in for nourishment versus what is currently there. So
Yeah.
I'm just curious from your perspective what that means for Brant Rock. So 2 things is, one is a lot of folks in Brant Rock look at Brant Rock as maybe more of a dumping ground, and maybe there should be more sand. And then 2, if the recommendation is nourishment and is bringing in more rocks, what are those rocks? What is that recommendation, and what does that do to Brant Rock? How much more beach does that give us? Does that give us more beach, or what? And so that's really, and also we know that it floods and all this other stuff, and we know that only part of our seawall is complete and things are underway. But again, this is a phenomenal presentation. I don't mean any negativity by the questions that I ask. Truthfully, I don't. I want to understand.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So Brant, what we're recommending for Brant Rock is not at all like Egypt Beach. Okay, Egypt Beach is more of a cobbled dune or a cobbled berm solution. What you have at Brant Rock, you've got structures there, so you don't have a dune or a cobble berm there. You've just got structures, and then it drops off into a beach with very low elevation that's inundated at a high tide. So you really don't have a beach.
Yeah, we have a couple of jetties. We have stones in between.
Yeah,
We have a lot of wildlife, and it's
Yeah.
a phenomenal neighborhood.
Yeah. So what we recommended there was this concept, which is an intertidal boulder field. So in the intertidal area, you'd have boulders, like big boulders, like 5 and 6 foot in diameter, big boulders. There's some out there already. And so we're looking to replicate that, but in a much bigger way.
Are you thinking like the rocks that you guys put between the jetty and the Fairview? Because about 5 years ago, there was some sort of study done and there were rocks put. And what happened, wherever those rocks were placed, it was like a launching pad for the water to come up, hit the rock, and then land directly on top of we call it the high road, that runs down the street into the Esplanade, which actually caused additional flooding. So if that's something that you're thinking about, I think we'd want to really talk as a local community and really talk to you, Leslie, and others regarding that plan, and really like maybe do a retro, like think back about that project and what actually happened based upon those rocks and where they were placed. Because it could have been like all the best intentions, like we know, like everyone has the best intentions, but maybe just doing a retro, looking back at like maybe the placement, maybe it was too far up or too far back. But okay, so that's good to know. So it's larger rocks is what you were thinking for Brant Rock.
Right. And so, and the purpose of them would be to reduce wave overtopping.
Okay.
That's damaging, the homes and the properties there.
Right.
We don't have a design for this, and further study needs to be done in order to come up with a design for the intertidal boulder fill. A part of that would be looking at, like you said, looking backwards to see what they've done before and did it work and not. So that would all be part of a study to evaluate this intertidal boulder field concept.
Okay, one last question and I'll give up the mic, I promise. So, we have this little local Brant Rock Village community. Let's just say we have a few fundraisers. Can we bring in our own beach nourishment, right? Can we tackle on to something that's happening in Green Harbor or Sunrise, where you're bringing in additional sand? Maybe it's not the greatest sand, but could we bring that sand into Brant Rock if we were able to raise the funds as a local community? And Mike Maresco, don't laugh at me.
There are a lot of rocky intertidal resources at Brant Rock. And so you're not going to be able to get permits. The town's not going to be able to get permits to cover those with sand because they're a valuable resource for macroalgae and fish and protected, species of fish.
Okay.
So not sand per se. You might be able to put some coarser material in there. I don't know that would meet the intent or the goals of what you're looking for. If you're looking for a sandy beach, A, you're not going to be able to get a permit for that, and B, it's not going to last because you're on a point with intense wave energy.
I got it.
Okay.
We're thinking, if I could put my chair down in a nice sandy spot, it would be nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm hearing though is that legally we probably couldn't put sand down. We could probably put something similar to what we have now. There is sand, by the way, that based upon the last storm, actually half our beach is sand in Brant Rock to come down. So we'd have to put something else down in order to solve that. And who would we work with, Leslie? Would that be you? If we were going to be thinking about that from a local perspective, or would that be like Mike or Bob Galvin? Like who do we go to? Who do we talk to?
That's a good question. We could help advise. We could work with the town and you guys on it. I think we'd want to talk to the town and just see if they have any interest in supporting you guys on it.
Okay. Again, just an idea, just hearing this firsthand.
Yeah.
Things we're going through. I'm just talking to a few folks and just interested, on our options, if you will.
Yeah, no, good comments.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that takes care of questions.
One.
Just one?
Yeah. Then there was the second question was explain what you mean by managed retreat.
Okay. Managed. Yep. So managed retreat is an option that should be considered in areas that are going to become inundated frequently, many times in a given year within the next 30 years and beyond. And so what it means is, taking those, buying those properties out and moving away from the shoreline because it's going to be underwater. So
Leslie?
it's a hard pill to swallow, but it's something that the towns need and the property owners need to start considering. Yes, Greg.
You have Megan's iPad, Maria's iPad, and Mike Fay has been holding his hand up on the screen.
Okay.
Mike Fay, go first.
Okay, Mike, you want to go?
You gotta turn your
Mike,
microphone.
you gotta unmute yourself.
Ladies can go first.
I'll
ahead, Megan.
go. Okay.
Go ahead, Megan.
Hi. Thank
Hi.
you for your presentation.
You're welcome.
I just had a couple questions. So I live over in Ocean Bluff, and I know that you mentioned that the town has a maintenance plan for the seawalls revetment, but our revetment actually hasn't really been maintained since the 1990s. They've done a few emergency repairs, so I kind of question when you guys did this, the study, if it was as reliable, because you showed so much divergence, but there's a huge hole in our riprap wall, so it's not really very effective. So I don't know how representative it is to go by. So I understand what you guys are proposing. It's a little concerning because I'm in an area where you're kind of like gearing towards eventually I won't have a home. So it's a little, upsetting.
Yeah.
So
no.
I wonder if you could just re-study that, because I know that they've come and they're going to do some more emergency work, which we're very grateful for. The town's been very good in that respect. It's just that our area's, for whatever reason, been very neglected for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see. How do I answer that? So the numbers that we came up with for sort of status quo or maintaining the structures, those are based on industry standards for maintaining revetments and seawalls on a cost per linear foot. So I don't think we were promising that the town's going to come in and do the work. We're just saying this is what it costs if they do, maintain these structures over the next 30 years. So I would continue to keep working with the town and the town engineer if you think the seawall or revetment needs to be repaired, and try to, work with them to get that work done.
Yeah, because the riprap would be very helpful with preventing further damage. That's the whole point behind it. It'd be actually better than a boulder field.
Well, it would be better to protect the homes, but it's not going to do anything to protect you from, overtopping that's happening in areas where there is a wall. It's still going to be happening. So that was the intent of the boulder field, was to reduce that wave overtopping. And it's,
Well,
again,
maybe a
it's
combination or
sure. Yeah. It's just a potential. I mean, it's not decided, and further study needs to be done in order to evaluate its efficiency and effectiveness. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, but I would encourage you to keep talking with the town about, any sort of repairs you guys feel are needed for that revetment.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Maria and then Mike Fay.
Okay. Thanks.
Hi,
Greg.
Leslie. Actually, my questions was the same as Megan, because we're in the same situation.
Mhm.
I've seen the stats. I've heard your presentation, which, how do I argue that? I'm not trying to argue, but I'm like, we've been ignored for so long, as Megan has said. Is it a fair assessment? It looks so bad back there now, back of me. And we can show pictures. We've shown pictures and slides of how beautiful it used to look. And I want to say it probably hasn't been treated. I thought it was even longer than 1990, where the beach looked so beautiful, and they were able to do sand nourishments back then, and it didn't harm the habitats. So I don't know why, I know there's been this long gap, but I don't know if we couldn't try it again. I mean, I don't know, but it's, like I said, it was similar to Megan's, but.
Yeah. again, I would encourage you guys to work with the town to try to, get any sort of repairs to those existing seawalls. And again, we used our engineering judgment to determine where we thought beach and dune nourishment was a viable solution. And you got two things going against you in the Ocean Bluffs area. One is the rocky intertidal and impacts to those. So the regulatory agencies are not going to issue a permit to allow us to smother that rocky intertidal. The other is the fact that you've got this divergence of sediment transport to the north and south, sort of away from the Ocean Bluff, Hewitts Point, Brett Rock area. So that's one reason why you have so much beach erosion there, in addition to the fact that you've got these big seawalls that cause a lot of wave reflection and scouring of the beach. It's driven that sediment away, and there's no source of sediment coming in there now. So if we were to bring sand in there, it would not be a cost-effective solution. It would be cost prohibitive. I think the numbers we came up with over a 10-year period of $51 million with renourishment every year because of this divergence of sediment away from that area. So it's really not a viable solution for those reasons. And we tried to evaluate some other potential solutions with this intertidal boulder field. There may be other solutions out there. If the town is interested in pursuing them for you guys, then that's sort of another project. But in terms of viability for beach and dune nourishment in that area, we determined that it just wasn't viable for those two reasons. And I know that's a hard pill to swallow, and I feel badly. I wish I could have the answer that everybody wanted. Wish I could make everybody happy, but it's just not applicable in every location.
Thank you for listening.
Leslie, Mike Fay, and then Rose.
Okay.
Hey, Leslie, this is Mike Fay with Ocean Bluff Preservation.
Hi, Mike.
I went through your study a bunch of times, and we had engineers in our group go through your study as well. The sediment sampling collection points. Ocean Bluff wasn't sampled at all, so we don't know the grain size. And according to page 32 of your own study, in a sediment-starved area, it massively overestimates sediment transport. So the 6,100 cubic feet that heads north towards Sunrise and Fieldston, that's not entirely accurate because no sample was taken. And we don't even know the grain size, so we can't try and get larger grain size so that will stay and not erode, like according to CZM's own literature, like the storm fact sheet number 7. And that really hurts us with permitting down the road if things change. We're behind on that.
Yeah.
Also,
But
with
can I answer that before I forget? Can I just
Sure.
respond to that? So the numbers in the sediment transport potential diagram, those are potential numbers. So if there is
Right.
sand or material on the beach, that's the rate at which it's going to exit out of there.
potential.
So if that's
not
the
a
rate,
fact.
it's
just
okay. Well, yeah,
potential.
it's sure, but it's a potential based on if there were sediment there.
But you never took a sample, so you don't know.
Okay, but if there was sand there or gravel or whatever, the sediment will be moving out of there at those
There is
rates.
sand there. There is sand there. You can get down there.
But there's not 69,000 cubic yards of sand there.
Well, actually, I don't know if you can see this, but this is just beyond the boulder belt that we have. You can see the sand at low tide. It's there. It's not going anywhere. It's been there for years. It hasn't moved. It's actually heading south.
But what I was going to say is that those sediment transport potentials, let's say we did put some sand or some gravel or some sand or gravel out there, it would move away from this area to the north and the south, and you would be faced with frequent renourishment in order to maintain that beach out there.
Well, the sand that's offshore from the boulder belt, if we had some sand or had the boulders removed, because that's keeping the sand from coming back naturally, protecting our revetment. The funny thing is, exactly where we need the sand nourishment is exactly where the revetment is falling apart. So if we just had sand nourishment once every 5 years, just a small section, it would massively protect our revetment, give access to the beach for maintenance, for public safety personnel. We have a fire station right behind the Massasoit Ave ramp that they have no access to get down there for water safety rescues. We have surfers, paddle boarders. A young man died there about 9 years ago, right off the Massasoit Ave ramp. They didn't launch from there, if I remember correctly. It really hurts. And with regards to this coastal, sensitive coastal resources, the side sonars, according to their own map, Ocean Bluff was never trawled. It was too rocky to trawl. So we don't even know what the survey says. So it's just an assumption that there's rare habitats. But then in your summary of rare habitats and priority protected zones, Ocean Bluff's not in it. Ocean Bluff's not even mentioned here. So it seems like just an assumption and keep ignoring Ocean Bluff.
Yeah, I don't want you to think that because we didn't ignore Ocean Bluff. We didn't trawl
Well,
in. We didn't trawl in.
You didn't do any sediment sampling. You didn't do any trawling, and multiple times in the study, in your presentation, we're misidentified. We're referred to as Sunrise. We're referred to as Brent Rock. You have Chickatawbut Ave, which is dead in the middle of Ocean Bluff, listed as Brent Rock. So it seems like we were ignored.
Yeah, I really don't want you to think that, and I apologize if that is what you think. In terms of the trawling, we couldn't get in there because it was too rocky, which proves that it's rocky habitat, which the agencies consider as habitat for macroalgae and essential fish habitat for juvenile cod.
And this is a timeline of our beach from 1990, 2011, and to now. You can see the erosion. We were a nice sandy beach, 2011, which I'll show in a second, and now.
Mm-hmm.
The intertidal, according to the Wetlands Protection Act, an intertidal beach is a naturally occurring rocky point. Ours is actually man-made because we have an adjacent seawall, which causes some erosion towards us, and our jetty has been decimated and has never been maintained or repaired. In fact, it's probably been had some boulders taken out of it, and that used to protect us even in the no-name storm, which was catastrophic. We didn't lose a single bit of sand from that, but since our jetty has been destroyed, the erosion has gotten worse. We have a letter from Coastal Zone Management in the town of Marshfield from 2011 saying sand nourishment is needed from Brent Rock all the way through to Fieldston. That includes Ocean Bluff. Nothing was done but that, and it seems like Brent Rock and Ocean Bluff keep being ignored. And this intertidal boulder field, it's not natural for us. It's always been sandy. Just because there's been no maintenance and no plan, it became a boulder belt. And
so, I mean, maybe this is something we can continue to work on with you guys in the town.
Leslie, we've reached out to you multiple times to meet in person. We can social distance. We can be across. We'd love to tour the area with you, show you the pictures, the historical data. I know you go up to Third Road all the time. I reached out to Elise. She was supposed to forward you something. We just never hear back from you.
Mm-hmm.
We'd love to work with you. We talk to anyone in the town of Marshall. We love working together to find solutions, but it seems like nobody wants to find a solution for this, at least to protect their event and protect the infrastructure, protect 139, which is a state-owned but federally designated evacuation route. We're doing things to save people's lives here.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm happy to come up and meet with you. So I'll reach out to you after this, and we'll find a time when we can come up and get together and talk
Fantastic.
about things we can do to help you guys. Yep, you're welcome.
Rose is next.
This is Peter, Rose's other lesser half.
Aw.
Oh yeah. Going back to the diversion of sediment, I'm particularly relating to, we're on Third Road residence, so we're in that Ocean Bluff, Fieldston, Sunrise Beach area. Now, we've been here, her father built the house back in the 40s, so I personally have been here since the early 70s, and I saw and experienced the benefits of the nice sandy beach with the jetties. Now, the jetties were all up and down our beaches, and the sand went no place, even after the big storms, the no-name storms and so forth. They were never replaced, and I could never get an understanding as to if that was the part of the beach that was damaged, why weren't they replaced? Or is it a term that you use, re-management or the management of the beaches? Like putting the jetties back every 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, it's got to be a lot cheaper than what we're currently experiencing and what you're proposing. I don't understand why the jetties is not a consideration. And then if it is, why isn't it listed as not a viable option? And then my last question is, Do you have any examples in this general area of eastern Massachusetts coast where the Boulder Rock Field, I think I'm saying that right, the Boulder Rock Field has been successful in doing what it was intended to do?
Yep. That's an excellent question. It is a newer idea.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a newer idea.
All right.
So we're testing we're testing that up in Boston Harbor the next year or two. They've used it out on the West Coast. I don't know of any examples of it in New England. So it's a newer idea. That's why I'm saying it's a potential idea. It's not decided for sure that's what should be pursued for this area, but it's
Okay, so talk to me about the jetties.
Yeah.
What your history is and what's
So-
happened to the jetties? Are they that bad of a solution?
First of all, I'm going to say that the structures you're talking about are really called groins. Jetties are the things that are at the entrance to the like the harbor. Okay, so these are groins. Okay, I don't mean to be teachy about it, but they're groins.
No, but
So-
that's a fair point, Leslie, because everybody talks about them as jetties. So
Yeah,
we're going
that's
to be talking
fine.
to each other. We might as well use the correct terminology.
So I don't know anything about the history of those groins. I don't know about when they were damaged. I don't know if they were ever licensed or what. I think when I look at them on the photographs, it seems like, someone made them on top of sort of an existing natural rocky outcrop. So it's an extension of a natural rocky area.
What about the Brant Rock jetty?
Same thing.
The same thing.
Brant Rock groin.
Well, there's a large rock at the end of that groin.
Yeah.
It's been there forever and a day. And we
Yeah,
know
so
that the water has been coming in, but yet we haven't been, raising that jetty out.
Right.
So I think to hear that gentleman's point, I think he raises a great example as to why don't we? Like, would that help protect?
Well, a couple of things. So groins cause that they do impound sediment to create beaches in places where you have sand or any sort of material moving along the beach. You don't have that anymore. It's sediment starved. You could build those as long as, if you were allowed to build them bigger, they would help hold any sort of material, but there's nothing moving along the beach. So there's nothing for it to catch.
Understood. But if we brought sediment in.
But you have rocky intertidal out there and you're not allowed to smother rocky intertidal with sand.
And
because
Leslie,
of
Leslie, sorry,
who would we talk to?
That's Mary.
wait, Mary.
Yes, go ahead.
We were referring to, this is Rose, we were referring to the groins that were between 3rd Road and went all the way down to
13th.
Wrexham almost, into 13th Road. And those were they were originally put in place after World War II or during World War II to protect the coast. And they were cement and they were attached to the seawall and it was.
Oh, those things. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So those are like little footings at the base of the seawall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they protected our beach and we had sand all the time. And in 78, a number of them got destroyed
But they were
after the blizzard.
rebuilt.
They were rebuilt
And
incorrectly. And so then when I think it was, I don't know how many years after when they got lost again.
yeah.
So
Go
I
ahead.
don't know the history of those either. Those would to help to capture a little bit of sediment, but only as much as they stick out from the seawall, which was, 15, 20 feet maybe.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think they were sort of intended maybe to capture sediment and also as a structural feature for the seawalls to help hold them up.
Right. But I noticed that since they've been gone,
The erosion.
you can now measure where that sand has been traveling over the years, as you presented on that slide.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? It is
Yeah.
obvious what's going on since the groin/jetties have been removed
Yeah.
by Mother Nature and not put back. It clearly, now that we've had a 35, 45 year of observations here, it has clearly had a benefit. And with them gone, it has clearly allowed more sand to travel, whether it's north or south or elsewhere.
Mhm,
It's
mhm.
going away.
Yeah, 'cause if we had more of them, we wouldn't be in the spot we're in.
That's
I
right.
agree, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that coupled with the fact that you don't have any source of sediment anymore. The sediment, as I
Right.
keep saying, the beach is sediment starved, so there's nothing to fill the beach when the other sediment moves away. There's nothing coming into the beach because everything's armored.
Leslie, it's Bob Galvin. Just a quick question. None of these structures, these groins, were ever licensed. They predated the recognition that they needed to be licensed.
Yeah.
And there's probably a significant dispute over whether they could be relicensed. But the way I've heard it explained in the past is that because they interfere with the flow of sediment along the coastline, it was unlikely that they'd be permitted again.
Right.
We
Yep.
still have one in Ocean Bluff. There's one right outside my
Excuse me.
house.
Mr. Galvin, I have emails from Coastal Zone Management and Army Corps that say that there's no ban or no problem. It could be rebuilt or reconstructed in some way, repaired.
I know a little bit about this, and I know you know a little bit about this, and I'm happy to have the discussion offline with you about this, but I want other people to get their questions in. My only point was this is a licensing requirement.
Yeah, no, I think you make a good point, Bob. So they're not licensed now and weren't in the beginning, and so it would be hard to rebuild them. In addition to the fact, or because of the fact that they do interrupt any sediment that's moving along the beach and therefore cause adverse impacts downdrift. So they cause erosion down to beaches, down the coast.
It protected our beach for years. So, because they
So,
started getting destroyed, then it destroyed the beach.
Leslie, this is Rebecca Haney. Would you like me to help out a little bit here?
Sure.
This is Rebecca Haney from Coastal Zone Management. Groins, new groins and jetties are structures that can be proposed. If you fill them to entrapment, they have to be the minimum length, width, and height necessary. It depends on the area, whether you have a sandy beach or a rocky area. You do have to look at the habitat as to whether you could fill that with sand. So it is something that's very site specific, and that would add to the cost of your project. So, that groins, in addition to nourishment, could be considered in different areas, but that's hard to have a broad discussion when you're looking at 14 different areas for all of the study area. But that's something we could work with Woods Hole Group on, looking at whether that could be an option for the town to add to some of those areas where it can be nourished. Does that help?
Very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca.
Leslie, we have Valerie, who has a hand up on the screen.
Okay.
Hi. Thank you very much for your report. I want to go back to one of the beginning slides that you showed us, and it almost looked to me that there was not divergence, but on Sunrise Beach, it almost looked like there were convergence of sand.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true?
Yeah, there is an area up sort of roughly at the junction between Fieldson and Sunrise where the data shows convergence. We don't see sediment accumulating there now because the place is sediment starved. So that's why those arrows, that's why I was trying to describe those arrows are potential. So if there was
in actuality, there has been sand buildup in that area. And in actuality, in fact, this year when we first came down, there was sand in that area. Mm-hmm. But because they have been working on the seawall at this point in time, there is no sand. And in fact, by Third Road, right in the area where Peter and Rose were talking about, they have put boulders up against the wall and up against the stairs, and they've even cemented them. So, when you're talking about sediment and sediment going into the water, I watched the fellow the other day not only put that black sheathing in the water and let it float out onto the boulder rocks and into the ocean, but also the cement went out into the water, covered all of the water, covered all of the rocks that was out there. And, if we're going to talk anything about protecting the environment, that is not happening with plastic, with bottles, with cements going out into the ocean and into the rocks. And it is a nursery for the small mackerel. And, it's not there right now. We see dead fish there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not familiar with what actual construction is ongoing at the moment. So I guess I would encourage you, if you think something's going on there that's not right to talk with the town about that.
Well, it's not. And we all have pictures of it. And as a biologist, it's a little disturbing to watch and see what's happening out there, because the people that are working in that area right now, doing whatever they are doing, the actual sand is being washed away, and we've got cement washing out into the ocean. So they do need to be aware of it.
Okay.
Mike, have you talked to the DPW about that, the contractor? Mike Maresco?
I have not talked to any of the contractors. There was a
No,
fellow.
I'm thinking the DPW, like Mike Maresco.
I don't know who they are. There was a fellow there 2 days ago, and I asked him when the black sheathing that they put underneath the rocks and sediment, and when I asked him, is he really going to leave that floating out into the ocean? He told me he tried to get it. Well, I watched him, and he didn't try to get it. He didn't even get his shoes wet. I went out, and I almost sunk in the sand trying to get it. So, I mean, he was kind of rude and said, I'm sorry, I couldn't get it, and left.
Yeah, these are contractors we hire.
Yeah, well, they're not doing their job.
Right, Mike, I mean, I think that needs to be taken back to the DPW.
Well, Mary, first of all, the whole situation's been monitored by the DPW. Rod Procaccino's been down there numerous times meeting with the neighbors. Sean Patterson, the interim DPW, has been down there monitoring, meeting with the neighbors, as well as Bill Grafton and the Conservation Commission. There were a few issues that had to be addressed. One was there was peat that someone thought was oil. They were down there, they addressed those. They're doing the seawall. All of that stuff is monitored. And I have to rely on the DPW. They do a great job protecting the community, building the seawall. We're probably one of the most aggressive communities on the South Shore, whether it's doing revetment, whether it's doing seawalls. It's an enormous project. When I was a selectman back in 2006 or 7, we did a study at that time. It was like $70 million to replace all of the seawalls. The storms have gotten a lot worse even since then.
No. I'm not saying anything about the efforts that you're making. My question is on the oversight of your subcontractors.
Not going to speak. I'm not going to have you challenging when I'm trying to give information. Thank you, Mary.
Can I just say one thing? At our third road, when we have had meetings with the town, and we appreciate them coming down. The other day, we were at the wall with the people from the town, and they, at the bottom of our stairs, they cemented, and they had a pitch that went down for people to be able to walk down to the beach. And we were talking with the gentleman from the town about how dangerous it was, because the pitch is so high, and it doesn't gradually decrease to give access to people to get to the beach safely. And particularly if you had anybody with disabilities or an elderly person. Someone actually fell yesterday, and the gentleman said to us, "Oh, I can walk down here." And it wasn't about him. It was about the design of it was poor. It's literally, it just slopes down like this, when you could have made sloping steps that went down the way you needed them to go with the rocks. And it's deplorable, and it's unacceptable, because we have to live here and we can't even get on the beach appropriately.
Rose, we're getting off topic.
I apologize. I just was responding to that.
Okay, but this is for the CZM beach nourishment, not for maintenance and construction issues that the DPW needs to deal with.
Right.
We had iPad 10, who we would like your name, and Kelly has been holding her hand up as well.
iPad 10, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Hi, this is Deidre King. I live at 564 Ocean Street in the ocean, right on Ocean Bluff. This may not be appropriate, because you just mentioned that this is strictly about sand nourishment and such, but I am concerned with in the 10 years I have lived here, there are now developing new canals, so to speak, through the revetment. I'm concerned about the revetment protection of, the first row of houses, as everybody is, the infrastructure behind us, as you know, Route 139 and that type of thing. And I really would like to know what is the true status of your thoughts and plans to maintain, just rebuild it, maintain it, or whatever. I mean, if you're not going to do something, will you please be honest and say so? Because somebody mentioned, oh, we're maintaining the revetment. In the 10 years I've lived here, it's never been maintained. And there are pictures, gorgeous pictures of a beautiful sandy beach, but that revetment is a disaster. It's, as I said, there's new burrowing canals coming in under the revetment itself. So that's my comment. That's my question. What's the true plan here? Can we please be transparent? And furthermore, in the initial presentation, again, I heard nothing about Ocean Bluff. It's ignored. Thank you for your time.
Sure, this is Leslie. So I can't speak to what the town's plans are for repairs to the revetment in the Ocean Bluff area.
So perhaps the administrator could.
I don't know if tonight is the appropriate place for that.
Well, I would like to know, when is it going to be? I have been with the OBA Association, maybe this is for the administrator, for probably 3 years now. I've gone to meetings, I've spoken, I've been to town meeting. There's no maintenance being done, and it just gets pushed aside and pushed to this one and that one, and da-da-da-da. I mean, what's the true story? Let's be transparent.
I'm happy to, attempt to answer that question. We are transparent. DPW, as I was saying when Mary interrupted me, was that DPW does have a plan. They've always had a plan. They attack seawalls. They attack beach nourishment. They attack the revetment on those areas that are the worst and are going to cause the greatest potential of danger. All of this costs money, and they try to do it gradually. And as I was saying, we've been very active and proactive on doing this. As folks know, last year we appropriated another $3.5 million to be able to go after state grants to match the residents' commitment to repairing seawalls, repairing revetment. We got a plan going for Ocean Bluff with Mike Fay and his group.
I am in Mike Fay's group.
Okay. So as you know, we approved the study. The study was being done.
Correct.
We have to come up with the money to do the project, and that's the appropriate procedure and how it's done. All of that is managed through the DPW. I, as a town administrator, not to pass the buck, I have no control over DPW. DPW has 3 elected Board of Public Works members: John Cusick, Bob Shaughnessy, and Dave Carrier. And those are the elected officials that make the decisions on DPW-related issues. Rod Procaccino is the lead engineer, and he spends a lot of time out in the community making sure that he's addressing, and he does a great job at grading severity of those. There's a limited amount of resources, and, as far as planning, as long as I've been involved, Rod and DPW doing what they can with the funds that are available in the grants. I mean, the last dozen or so years, the storms have been tremendous, and only getting
Mike, this
in the seawall in Brant Rock. If you look at that seawall was built 3 feet higher, goes 10 feet down, 7 feet wide. People remember that 18 storm, the waves in 2018. The waves were going 35 feet in the air.
I know that. I mean, I'm here. I live here. I personally shelled out $100,000 plus to have rocks put on that revetment in front of my house. That's personal cost to an investment in this community. And I don't see anything back from the town. I'm nothing against the engineer, the administrator, the DPW. All the people that I have met in these groups, appear to be, oh yes, we're very supportive of this and that. But I don't see anything happening.
Hi, this is Valerie speaking. I'm just going to jump in for a second and ask that
I don't want to be, you know, a complete nuisance about it, but I just see nothing. So
this is Valerie speaking. I'm just going to jump in and ask that, you know, all of us consider setting up a separate Zoom meeting where we can focus on talking through these issues. It doesn't have to be broadcast on PAC TV. I know that the town of Duxbury has a Zoom account. Perhaps Marshfield does as well. It sounds like there's a lot of dialogue that needs to take place so that we're all hearing each other and have more time to talk through these issues. And for tonight, try to focus on the nourishment while we have Leslie's time.
Hey, Mike, right. We had Kelly waiting. Kelly, you need to unmute yourself.
There we go. Actually, Rod came down to our house and was very helpful. We've lost a lot of boulders at the bottom, and he came down and indicated that they are going to try to work on that. To the lady's point, though, the water is creeping up under the revetment. But my main point in response to Leslie's very complete presentation is my concern about this boulder field. To the lady's comment about the boulder field and what happened when they put one up by the Fairview, the water just hit that and went over the wall. And I'm afraid that that's what's going to happen here. If we don't repair the revetment and we put in a boulder field, the water's going to hit it and come up and go on to Route 139, destroying utilities and so forth. That's my concern.
This is Val jumping in. Let's have a separate meeting.
That's fine. But nobody had talked about the boulder field in Ocean Bluff. I just wanted to I've lived there for 30 years. And we used to have a beautiful beach and a beautiful revetment, and the groins were working fine. And now we're going to put a boulder field in. I can't understand it. So I'm glad Leslie said she'd come down and meet with us, and we're more than happy to meet with her. But I do want to thank Rod for coming down, and he met with my husband, and they're talking about doing some emergency repairs at the bottom of our revetment. Thank you.
Welcome. Any other questions about the nourishment parts of the project? I saw one question from someone in Duxbury acknowledging the fact that there's a section of the Duxbury shoreline that doesn't have a revetment. It's just sort of a natural dune. And was that considered? It was considered, and you know, in that area we would restore that dune and then build the beach out in front of it. So that would be included as part of the project. But that is on private property, so we need those access easements in order to do that work.
Thank you. That was my question. This is Candace Martin. I know the homeowners would be very interested in having that dune improved upon and have a better protection along their waterfront.
Yep. So that was considered. Are there any other questions about, I see one here about how do we get copies of the report. The report is really a permit application. And I know that a draft copy of this is on the Town of Marshfield website. There will be a final version, I'd say, in the next 2 to 3 weeks that will be posting up on the town websites as well. But if you want a preliminary look at a draft version, I'd suggest you go to the Town of Marshfield website and you'd find it there.
Great. And Leslie, that includes all the beaches?
All the beaches, yeah. I want to make sure everyone understands those 3 examples I went through for Wrexham, developed portion of Wrexham, Ocean Bluff, and Garnet Road were just 3 examples. We did the same thing for all 14 beaches. I just couldn't go through it tonight because we'd all be I'd still be doing it and we'd be yawning and I would have lost you.
And this is Val again. I want to say, I see there's questions about which neighborhoods are going to be reached out to. In the reports that Leslie is doing, there are maps of each what we consider neighborhood. And we will be approaching everyone in those mapped areas so that you'll be able to visualize by looking at the maps where your house is and which project your house is considered to be a part of. And that's how we're going to group everyone when we do our outreach. And if we need to, we can do neighborhood by neighborhood, separate Zoom meetings with folks to, try to have a more focused dialogue for the neighborhoods.
Yeah, that's a good idea, for sure.
Leslie, it's Bob Galvin again. Something that everybody that's not familiar with this really needs to also pay attention to is that both towns, Marshfield and Duxbury, are going to need the ability to access these properties via easements. And our inability to gain those easements is a guarantee that things that we all agree are beneficial will not easily happen, or will be delayed, or might not happen. So we're going to be reaching out to all of the people that are waterfront down there in order to secure these easements. And to the extent the neighborhood groups are represented here, it would be great if you would tell your neighbors these are coming, because without your support to be able to do these things, and I'm not suggesting that this might be just the beginning, but without your support to get public access here and willingness to give easements, it could jeopardize aspects of the project or prevent us from completing segments that might be particularly important to certain groups.
Yep, that's important that you said that. I think that's, you're right on point there. So that's why we do have lists of all the property owners. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's quite a few property owners. And the towns are working on, those letters and those easements to send them out.
Leslie, I don't see any other hands up either on the participant list or on the screen.
All right.
I have one. Look at Hewitt's Point, please.
Okay. Look at it. You want me to bring the presentation back up? Is that what you're saying?
No, I want you to consider, I'd like you to consider reinforcing Hewitt's Point, which is really a jetty, to help bring back and retain some of the sand that's been lost.
Okay, so that would be something that we would look at sort of as a separate, issue, like Rebecca was talking about. And, we can work with the neighborhoods and the town to evaluate other alternatives for these areas, but it's not something that would be included in this project, which is to look primarily at beach and dune nourishment.
Well, we've already talked as a group with the Ocean Beach Preservation Association about these issues. So we have had ongoing neighborhood meetings. We don't really need to meet again, but we do need answers.
Okay.
Like, because with Leslie, is that a gap? Like not looking at the jetty as a part of your study? Like expanding that or the...
No, because the study was focused on, beach places where we could put in beach and dune nourishment. And so it's not a gap in the study.
Okay, so nourishment, jetty does not invoke nourishment is what you're saying.
Right.
Got it. Okay.
The question is how can Brant Rock Beach by Brant Rock maintain sand when on the other side they can't maintain sand?
Yeah, one side of Brant Rock Beach has sand and the other side doesn't.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is. Leslie, do you know why? Like, from a nourishment perspective, is that?
I mean, I think it comes and goes.
There's also in one section in Brant Rock.
Yeah.
Right, by the tower.
So it's impounded by whatever structures are there along the shoreline.
The jetty.
Yeah.
That's what's there.
Yeah. So that sort of acts to sort of anchor that little tiny beach there.
I think like OBP, like Ocean Bluff, Hewitt's Point, and Brant Rock, we need to talk to the town and have another separate study done, but we shouldn't really, we're off topic again. So we have to figure all this stuff out.
I think that's a good idea.
But it's not fair to Leslie because Leslie has nothing to do with this. It's been determined who's getting the sand nourishment and who isn't, and we're not. So that's that.
Well, I wanted to ask that question because I didn't realize that the scope, this is Norm Wright from 70 Stuckett Ave in Ocean Bluff. Your only focus was just sand nourishment. You didn't look at structures and how the structures affect the sand movement and such? Because I'm confused. Now that I'm totally confused by this, Leslie.
I mean, we studied the beach to understand how sediment moves along the beach and where there's sediment and where there isn't sediment.
But not the revetment and not the groins as you call them, or
well, that's all a part of it.
Structures.
That's all a part of it. I'm just saying that the focus of the project was on identifying sites where, given the existing conditions, where beach and dune nourishment would be viable resiliency alternatives.
Okay.
It wasn't to focus on, if we repair this structure over here, then we can, do something else. It was given the existing beach conditions, where is it a viable alternative?
Got it. So in your professional judgment, if we change some of the structures, like repairing the revetment, would that change the outcome of your study?
Repairing the revetment? No. I mean, as I said before, the structures.
You didn't look at it. Now you're telling me yes. I was asking you a question. I don't understand that you're answering it that way.
Well, so you're asking me is your question if
I study the revetment, yes or no? That's the question in this thing. I thought you.
We looked at all the structures along the beach. We did not look in detail, do an engineering assessment of all the structures. No, we did not.
I'm going to mute people if they are going to try to interrogate Leslie. This is not an interrogation.
But I do want to answer Mr. Wright's question. If your question is, if we repair this structure, will it fix our beach? The answer is no. If you repair the structure, it will provide more protection for your properties that are landward of it, but it's not going to magically create a beach in front of it. Because there's no sand in the system to migrate onto your beach. So the revetment is for protection of the properties behind it. It's not going to create a beach.
And part of the reason there is no sand is because of the armoring and structures.
Yes.
Okay, Leslie, we've been at it for 2 hours. I see no hands.
I got my hand up.
Mike Fay, and I believe after that we're going to be done.
There's one member in our group, Dave Miller. His video won't work, so he has a question. Dave, can you hear me? Well, anyway, Dave's question was, if we had sand in front of our beach for so many years, why can't we have sand brought back? That was Dave's question.
Yeah. I know it's hard to understand, but there's those rocky intertidal resources offshore that are protected resources that we're not allowed to smother with sand. We've got the same problem in Sandwich, where those beaches downdrift to the canal jetties have starved those beaches. There are rocky intertidal areas that have appeared over the years because of the starvation. We're not allowed. We've been working for those guys for 30 years. We're not allowed to cover those rocky intertidal resources. We can nourish beaches nearby, and over time, sediment might gradually sort of make its way into some of those areas, and that could happen to Brant Rock and Hewitt's Point, and Brant Rock, Ocean Bluff, Hewitt's Point, and Brant Rock. If we nourish Fieldston and Sunrise, you're going to be the beneficiary of some of that material as it migrates away from Fieldston and Sunrise.
Okay, that was Dave's question. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, no more questions? All right, I want to thank everybody for coming and offering comments and questions. Feel free to submit other questions or comments via email, and we'll post some answers to the frequently asked questions on the websites.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.
You're welcome.